getting them to a level where they can conduct dissertation, but not just that, and I'll talk about that with the literature as well, is, you know, how do you prepare these students to go on beyond that dissertation? So when they first come into the program, in the course previous to mine, they will conduct an environmental scan, and that's typically where they would take their topic of interest, one that could potentially turn into a dissertation. They would conduct a thorough literature search and some sort of rapid qual type interviews where they are talking with sort of key stakeholders in their field to help then narrow down a research question. So when they get to our course in 505, they're really starting from what is qualitative research, those, and I'll share like a beginning slide, and then really getting just in one semester, going from what is it to tailoring your research questions to more qualitative inquiry, refining the interview guide, creating a code book, starting with initial coding, learning max QDA, and then doing a very early construct synthesis. I wouldn't say we even get to thematic analysis. That's what happens in the second summer course for those who choose to take that. So that's the practice of coding and analysis. They get much more deeply into that. They learn visual tools in Max QDA. They learn analysis in Max QDA. They come up with some preliminary themes again, and the goal is to complete the course with a draft analysis plan for future dissemination work. Most students do take this course. There are a few who don't, as it's not mandatory. And then, so I'm not going to read these out loud, but just that these are the objectives for the first spring course. So just to highlight again that really they come all the way from learning about what it is all the way to, and here's an example of where we start, you know, and they do get some of this in previous classes where they talk about ontology, epistemology, but to me this is like really starting from the beginning and trying to change the concept that so far as quantitative researchers they've really been trained to understand that there is one way of understanding something, there is one reality, and if you just design the perfect study, you will be able to uncover that one reality and one truth. And so even just starting to bend your brain around more constructivist approaches is where we start with that. Here are the topics, again, that I've reviewed already briefly, but that we cover each week. So starting with assumptions and purposes, problem statement, revising research questions. We do spend a lot of time in coding. And sorry, just also because folks just joined, I'm sharing this as context for sort of what I'm engaged in right now with training, but I would also love to hear in our group work and discussion later if you have feedback for any of this that I'm presenting, because we are trying to revamp how this is done and try to make improvements to both the courses. So would love any commentary on this as well. We end with some analysis approaches, trustworthiness, and then talking about how we might write up findings. Here's the second course, which is much more heavily focused on application, creating a code book, and then really spending the entire summer semester coding a existing data set. So that's brand new. We've always had students code their own data set like they do in the spring course. Now we've switched to giving them an existing data set and having them work in that. So I would love to hear if you have done both or either and which has worked. Here is a sort of flow chart. If you can imagine, our students really love these type of you know, it looks like, oh, you go from one step to the next and then you jump to the next. And, you know, it's this very nice, clean pathway. The arrows are supposed to depict that, again, it is iterative and you are going to do a lot of moving back and forth between these points. But I think for novice learners, sometimes it is nice to have these type of step-by-step activities. And then here are the textbooks that we use, and it's a lot. It's 4 that we require for these 2 courses, and then 3 that are recommended. I have a section in the Padlet around what type of text you have used, what you have liked. I would love to hear more about that. Any questions before I move on to what I briefly uncovered in the literature? Okay, and this section will be quick as well because I really want to get to the part where we all get to teach. There wasn't a ton of textbooks. I don't know if you all have come across textbooks in teaching qualitative research methods, but these were the 2 I came across. I had never seen either, so would love any feedback on if you have used these or found them helpful, or if there are others out there that I did not catch. So when I was looking in the literature, I found sort of, again, the 2 camps of work, one around sort of making this jump, working with, across, within, against different worldviews, and really teaching about that qualitative thinking, in part with the assumption that folks are coming from a more post-positivist, quantitatively oriented background. So I think that's one assumption that we can make. One of the papers was about, you know, working in the world of the randomized control trial. How do you thrive and survive in teaching qualitative research? So again, probably the papers that I come across are more from that public health / medical model. But here's just a list of some of the papers that that cover this topic of using qual pedagogy as a transgressive practice, as a way to sort of bridge that divide between the quantitative and qualitative worlds in terms of bridging that paradigmatic group. And I have this list of references, so I'd be happy to share that as well. Just some summaries from those papers, and something I've alluded to a little bit already is that it can be quite deeply unsettling for students to really challenge those scientific assumptions. And I thought this was interesting, you know, dating from elementary school science fairs, we teach a very quantitatively oriented way of understanding science and what is good science. So often what we introduce as qualitative educators is really incongruent with what the dominant scientific world that students inhabit. For example, you know, the centrality of subjectivity, being reflexive in our work, being interpretive, and that theory can be emergent and multiple, that there can be many different truths. So I think even just starting with that is really key. And I don't know currently if I do enough of that in my class. I don't think that I have great activities to help with that. So would love to hear your feedback on what that is. I do hear a lot of expressions of discontents, especially, I think it's all fine, 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 fine. And then when they get to the stage of coding and analysis where things are very fuzzy and murky and not prescriptive, this doubt, discontent, unsettledness, I definitely have experienced a lot of that in my teaching practice. what have you noticed? Have you experienced that in students, in yourself? Has that been something that has come up for you?
So I can go.
Please.
um, so this is Teresa O'Leary again, from Northeastern. So I definitely have experienced this. So I've taught research methods, and I still haven't gotten my college to quite get that we need a qualitative research methods class like solely devoted to this. So oftentimes I've tried to teach some qualitative methods inside of this larger empirical research methods class for computer scientists.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening is this is incredibly uncomfortable for the students. So like they'll listen to me talk, just as you said, about like, okay, here's what qualitative research is, and here's how you do it. And especially for the computer science folks who have like, really degrees in engineering. And I also teach PhD students. So these are PhD students. For them, this concept of coding, of course, they have a different mental model.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And for them, things are incredibly clear and programmatic. That's how they approach many things. And so this ends up causing some real questioning, the frustration, and then ultimately frustration, wondering if the method in and of itself is just way too subjective and it's not objective.
mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of that type of remediation that I end up having to do, as well as starting them off with transcripts. I actually bring, data like you've suggested that you're going to do for your spring semester. I've brought data where I kind of know it's not super, super deep. And
Yeah,
so the first coding activity then is a little bit superficial, but it allows them to at least start the practice of applying codes and then thinking about not just coding things that are happening, but like why they're happening. And so I try to really focus on that to get them to sort of let go of labeling. Like they think of coding as labeling discrete events that are happening, and not necessarily coding the how and why an event is happening in a transcript. So that long thing spiel is just me saying that. I see a lot of students struggle with this. And I don't know if I've even figured out a great way of addressing that feeling for them yet.
And as you mentioned, I think it takes time to do. And so to rush that process in, a short time is challenging.
I don't teach, but in consulting with many different projects, I've come to wonder whether, I've never had this happen to me, but whether it would be nice to first introduce in the teaching setting a very narrow research question that is based on a well validated theory as a way of, baby steps into starting with a more deductive, if you will, very, very constrained kind of project, and then moving them to a more a project where there is more opportunity for inductive, creating your own codes and things like that. That maybe that's a way to help people who are more firmly grounded in quantitative methods to ease them into understanding to me, it's like there is a certain subjectivity, but there's got to be rigor with that subjectivity in qualitative work. I don't know.
Hi, this is Katie Clark. I've taught qualitative methods as part of a research methods or public health practice, not specifically. And one activity that I did that I found was really helpful is that we analyzed a menu, and we used like a menu from a restaurant, and it was like, who can eat here? And like thinking about like the different types of food and the cuisine, and like, what can the gluten-free people eat? And what about the pescatarians and the vegans? And I was like, you guys just developed codes. Like that's how you coded the menu.
Oh,
and
clever.
I think one of the challenges about qualitative work is that you have to learn so much all at once. Like you're trying to understand research and research questions and conceptual frameworks, and then
Yes.
the whole coding thing on top of it.
Mhm.
So what I find is that if you can teach them the concept with something not research related, that's not intimidating, that that they actually do every day, they don't realize it, and then apply it to research, I find that that kind of like pivot has been really helpful. Particularly the students that I teach are at state schools, or they're not full-time students. So these are non-traditional students.
Mhm.
So trying to come up with ways to teach this in a way that's not overwhelming to people.
That's a great. I have two things to say. One, as a registered dietitian, I love that menu, food connection. That's amazing. And two, Loretta, you said, you don't teach, but I think those of us, anytime we've worked in a research team with non-qualitative people, we're teaching, right? We're conducting research and teaching at the same time. So I think all of us will do that.
I find that the biggest, well, the two biggest things that I really want to teach to the teams that I work with is, number one, that qualitative research is very time and labor intensive, and that that it takes you have to have a process of synthesis. And there's a great Sandalowski article, 20 years old at this point, that I really like, that lays out a typology of qualitative research. And I'll put it into your whatever, Padlet.
Oh, please.
Yes, I'll put it in. But that those are the two things that I think are really very important for them to understand is you can't do this. You can maybe do it more rapidly than other questions or methods, but that it still winds up by being labor intensive. And you've got to synthesize. You've got to synthesize the data and reduce it. That's something that they don't understand.
Yep. Thank you.
So I have one more
Please.
shameless, shameful self plug,
Oh.
which is that I'll put it in the chat. But I used qualitative interviews when I created an audio documentary about women in the opioid crisis. And the documentary, it's a half an hour audio only, but it was based on qualitative interviews. And again, it's a way to kind of, so I use the documentary to teach part of qualitative methods, because you hear about the research question and the methods in the introduction to the documentary, and then you hear the people's stories. So I use it as, and I have discussion questions already built for this. So if anyone's interested, feel free to email me and I can send you the discussion guide for that.
Oh, okay. And then Katie, I'm going to ask you to also put what you put in the chat into the Padlet that I'm going to put up in a little bit. This next slide is really more specific to teaching in sort of a doctoral potentially program, but additional challenges that we come across all the time are inadequate writing skills. Many of us didn't take writing in college, undergrad, high school. I think it's been less emphasized, even for those of us who are native English speakers. And qualitative research is highly language dependent. As Loretta said, the importance of synthesizing, but when you synthesize down the words you choose to represent that huge body of data, that word choice is so critically important. And if your language skills are not great, it affects the quality of the writing, I think. There are paucity of supervising faculty with qual experience. So this is more specific to master's and doctoral students, I would say. I often come across for mixed methods research, if there are doctoral committee members with conflicting understandings of how qual research should be done. That is challenging. And then institutional support. The paper by Eakin really talks about, if we want to have strong qualitative pedagogy, there has to be really institutional support for the methods. And I would say, even in my own school of public health, everybody does laud qualitative research. But if you look at the number of qual only faculty, if you look at our methods core, the ratio of quant to the qual methods core people, namely just me, one person, to many other statisticians, I think, the policies and the practices do not match. So I would say there's still limited institutional support for qual work at my institution specifically. And then this Eakin paper really, I thought this was really fascinating, is, when we're teaching qualitative work, we're not just teaching that student to get their dissertation done or their master's thesis done and get out the door. We're really teaching survivability within, if they are going on to do research or to conduct research in their practice related positions. Is they're always, as I think all of us have experienced, these sort of non-qual gatekeepers. So how do you train and educate folks to do qualitative research, not just for their own purposes, but then to be able to survive outside in their academic positions, in their practice positions? They need to be able to not just understand for themselves, but to be able to field questions and to be able to practice without compromising the rigor of what they're doing. So they're going to go out into their and have journal reviewers say, but your sample size, or what about generalizability? And they're going to need to be able to survive in that, to speak competently and to defend their qual methods, right, without compromise. So I think that to me that indicates, it's not just a level of proficiency. You got your dissertation, now you're out the door. To me, this survivability aspect is a whole nother level of competency, I think, that we want to be able to train folks to do. Teresa, I see you nodding. Did you want to add anything?
No, I just completely agree. I think that there's so many, I work with so many different technologists. I work on so many different projects because now in mobile health work and technology work and health informatics, for most grants, you're seeing this add-on for what the grant writer and lots of principal investigators feel like is an add-on, is this formative work that's always qualitative. And now, in order to get these grants funded, they're tacking on this. But so many times I end up on projects where the integrity of the research method is constantly being called into question. And so I sort of have to defensively and proactively maintain that integrity and talk about like how we're going to make it systematic and how it's going to have rigor and like the steps that we cannot skip. And I think that I love this idea of also like being teaching this quality in students from the get-go. And like, it reminds me, I have a son who just graduated with a master's in industrial engineering. And he always talked about how his professors would always talk about how he will be in the real world, always questioned for and pushed to like skip certain things for health and safety, and how he has to consistently just fight to maintain that integrity. And I feel that this is very similar because when we don't maintain the integrity of the research method, it ends up getting published, and it just ends up, folks have this idea of what they think qualitative research is, because they're also looking at some publications that are doing bad qualitative research. And so I just really like this concept and think it's super important, especially as the work is becoming so interdisciplinary.
Thank you. And this Eakin paper that I'll share, she really does a comprehensive discussion on this topic of what she calls survivability. So I encourage you to reference that. To me, as an educator, I think it really was a call to action for me that, you know, every student who comes across my my classes, I see now as you are now an ambassador for this method, and you as your son is doing, you know, Teresa, I think you are now a protector of of integrity and of an ambassador of sort of good, you know, rigorous methodology. That's how I see students.
You know, Yuka, one of the things that I try to convey is talking about rigor. I always say there's only two things, you know, for me at least, in judging the rigor of a qualitative study is that number one, you are absolutely transparent on all steps. And number two, and I think this is where you can push people along to understanding the difference between quant and qual, I say, there are many decisions that you will be making along the way. It's not like in the quant approach where basically you plan out your tests and then you perform your tests. Mm-hmm. So that I say the second thing is you have to be able to defend. I may not agree with your decision, but at least you should be able to provide me with a rationale for why you decided to do what you decided to do. Those are the two things that I think really boil down to a rigorous qualitative approach.
Thank you. So I just have a couple more slides left. Switching over now more to like actual activities, so coming a little bit away from the paradigmatic shift. There were some, as I mentioned, my very brief literature search, I came across ideas, and we've already had some great ones, but really focused on experiential learning as key learning activities, you know, the get it by doing it. So these bullets, and again, I can share the reference list, but using this open access data of interviews to teach students about do's and don'ts of interviewing, using cards with sentences and sort of sorting them into code piles. I love Katie's menu coding idea. I think anything that can make it experiential is at least in the very small body of literature is what is recommended. I also saw this example, if you've seen the Wolf of Wall Street movie. This was given as something that someone has done, is using this as an example of more, I guess, of qualitative thinking. So he has a group of salesmen in the room and he says, you know, sell me this pen. And most people will just start to talk about why this pen is great and, you know, why it's better than other pens. And instead, what he's saying, it's a trick question because I want them to ask me, do you use pens? Even when do you use them? What do you need them for? And then I can tell you why you need this pen. But really, to me, this is an activity in changing the way you think about a problem, is asking the right questions and getting to that inquiry piece before you start to assume or push your agenda on the communities that you're working with. So this was another sort of concrete example that I found that was more creative. And actually, there was a lot of more papers than I thought, sort of this whole body of work on using pedagogical comic stories, gaming, using film as an instructional strategy in qual methods, and then playing cards even. So I was just curious because I had never even come across a paper like this. Has anybody used film? Katie, you've already shared your example here, so thank you for that. Do you want to talk a bit about how students have received that activity? How has that been in the classroom?
It's been received really well. The first time I used it as, I originally developed the documentary as a public health intervention to reduce stigma for women who use substances during their pregnancy and then are in methadone treatment. And as I sort of went on in my career, it pivoted. I was like, I can use this to teach, because I didn't know this at the time when I did it, but it's actually structured like a peer-reviewed publication. So what I have students do is I have them listen to the documentary, and then I give discussion questions, and we have a discussion about it. And what it does is that it's also very helpful when you're teaching, when your students are kind of a variety. So the first time I used it, I was asked to teach, I had 4 students that I was teaching how to do interviews, and it was 2 men who who'd been incarcerated for 15 years, and 2 Yale medical students, and that was my class. And the nice thing about the documentary is that it cuts through the different comprehension levels when it comes to reading an article. So students, I think, really liked engaging like different senses, and then it also additionally gave us an opportunity to talk about the opioid crisis and what it means to be, and how do you and it's kind of a controversial topic, like pregnant women using heroin and then methadone. Like, how would you feel about interviewing this person, and how would you so it also gives an opportunity to talk about that part of qualitative work, where it's like, how do you sort of like maintain your composure when someone says something about being pregnant and waking up and grabbing the heroin under your bed, so
Wow.
and I think that it worked. I think it worked really well, and it serves like multiple like discussion points.
Thank you. For those who are students in the room, have you in your classrooms come across any use of film, comics, other creative activities? Maybe they're not being done, or maybe nobody wants to speak. Oh, I see a hand. Deb?
Sure. I'm new to the Yale community, but when I did coursework, it was before some of these methods, I think, were used more in the classroom. But I was a fellow about 15 years ago, and we took, there were a lot of real world examples shared. So like case reports or projects that were kind of works in progress. And that was very grounding for me, kind of akin to what Katie's been talking about. So, hearing about, I was a preventive cardiology fellow, so projects that the faculty were working on that we could get engaged with was a kind of experiential learning, but it really taught me what we had to do more than, say, reading about it. I found the coursework was often harder than just hearing about a case and seeing best practice, like in practice. I don't know if that helps others.
Thank you. Okay, I just have a few slides left, and I know we're quickly running out of time, but this was just another example of using film. So watching a slide from a movie together, having them transcribe just a short scene, talking about what effect does doing the transcription have on your analysis, on your intimacy with the data. I transcribed 55 of my dissertation. Thank you, Shanna Stell. And then writing descriptive notes to describe the scene and interpretive notes about the scene. So that's just another example. One activity that I wanted to share that I've started to do with the spring is have students talk about poetry. When I went to the IQM, International something Qualitative Methods, it's in Springfield, Illinois every year. They, ICQI, International Congress of Qualitative Methods. There was a speaker there who said, if you are a qualitative researcher, you should read poetry, because poetry is the thing that teaches you the importance of word choice, meticulous selection of word choice, and being pithy and, synthesizing a really complex large story or conceptualization, but synthesizing that down into a stanza, or so I think the practice of that was really important. And so I have students every week share their favorite poem and talk about that poem and what the poem is representing. It's this short piece, but it's representing a much larger concept or idea or body of work. So I just have a post there about an example. Okay, so now I have this Padlet. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And primarily because I'm the type of person that if I am in a group like this, I tend to not speak in person or in Zoom. So I just wanted to provide an opportunity for anyone, if you wanted to contribute. Why isn't that posting? I have a Padlet. Have you used Padlet before? Oh, there. So let me just show you what it looks like, and then can you see a little yellow green screen? Okay, so all it is just a place that I'm hoping we can all dump our ideas into. You can see here it says activities to stimulate qual thinking, activities to practice qual methods, general tips and best practices. So if you hear someone in your group saying, here's something that has worked really well, pitfalls, challenges you've come across, any other questions or aha moments. Oh, I didn't realize I put Will Smith there. Sorry about that. And then papers, texts, and other resources. So if you have used, or if you're in a class right now and you have a textbook you're using that you think is really amazing, all you do is just click on the comment box and you can just add your comment right there. And if you close that, it goes back to the thing. So if you don't mind, let's just do a brief, I'm still sharing, okay. So we're down to 14. So maybe I'll do 4 rooms.
Let me ask a question. I don't see how to access the Padlet. Do we need to go to a website?
So if you click on the link that I just posted in the chat box, it should open up in your internet browser. Does that work for everyone?
I don't see the link. Padlet, got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So open that up. And what I'm hoping is you can discuss, anything and everything we've talked about today. But if they happen to fall in these categories, if you can add to this Padlet, I would love to keep this as sort of a repository of ideas, of activities, of resources that those of us who are teaching can use. And I'll send this out along with the list of references.
Yuka, I want to let everybody know that in addition to recording, I think that we will also make available, if it's okay with you, Yuka, your slides and the Padlet.
Yes, of
Okay.
course. So we're short on time, so maybe we'll just do thanks, Melody. For those who can stay, maybe just like 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'll bring you back really briefly to close out. Okay, so you should see an invitation to join a room. And we'll come in and out, I think.
Yuka, I don't see where you're just gonna, so I'm trying to get to you.
Yeah, so you should, if you click on the breakout rooms, you'll see it says breakout rooms in progress.
I don't see an assignment for me is what I'm saying.
Oh, I didn't assign you, sorry. So you and I can just jump into any room that we want, or we can stay in here. Luis, do you see an invitation to join? Oh. You should have received a pop-up that says join room 3. Do you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so can you click on that and it'll take you to room 3.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Yuka, I'm still having a problem finding which one is the paper, text, and other resources. I was going to put in a Sandalowski article.
Oh, please. Okay, so let me share my screen. Do you see?
I don't
you
see.
s-
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes. All right. Okay. I
right
got it.
here. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh. Oh, okay. Luis went. I just like to do this, Loretta, because I'm going to pause recording this open. And if there are other thoughts or resources that you'd like to share, that would be great. Any comments or sort of overall things that came out of your discussion that you'd like to share with the rest of us?
So one thing that came out of our discussion that Lauretta was just speaking to, or part of what Lauretta was just speaking to, that reminded me, and I wanted to get your thoughts, Yuka. So I know that this was about qualitative analysis, this entire talk. But I often, now that I've been working with students, I often feel like teaching interview techniques and how to make sure that you're sort of controlling the interview in some way so that you're answering your research questions and it's not just unbounded. But really, like, that interview is critically important for then this analysis that's going to happen. And I kind of just wondered, I know it might be outside the scope, but Yuka, do you guys teach like interviewing techniques or anything like that with the students?
I mean, couldn't there be a whole semester on just teaching
Yeah.
and practicing interviewing? We really could do that. So we recently changed it because what happened was students were coming into the spring course and we were having them just frantically collect data so that they could learn the coding process. But what was happening was that just really crappy data, really poor interviewing skills, not, leading questions, cutting people off, all the things. So what we did is in the course prior, when I showed you, they did the environmental scan. What we have now is one of our qualitative educators go into that class. It's not a qualitative class. It's more of like how to inquire about a topic. They go in and do a couple of sessions with the students on best practices for interviewing. They practice with the students in class, and then the students they have a little primer before they get to our class. And then in our class, we have them revise their interview guide to say, now that you've looked at your data, what went well, what didn't go well.
Oh, I love that. I love
that iterative process is really valuable, but it takes time and there's no way we could do it if we didn't have that previous class to help them. I still think you could spend a whole semester on just learning how to interview well. And that's the reason why for the second summer class, we switched over to using our existing data, because them trying to do this much more engaged coding analysis process with their not great data was just causing so many problems. So yeah, that's something that we struggle with a lot. It's really critical that they use their own data because they learned so much from that process. So I do think there's value in that, but at the same time, to further their learning, it's not great. And sorry, I'm over time.
No, it's okay. Yuka, one of the things I wanted to add in, Sten had to run. Dr. Vermund was the dean of the School of Public Health here at Yale, and he said, I have to run, but my breakout had comments from Brazil and Mexico, and we all agreed across our 3 nations that qualitative methods are not in the comfort zone of physicians, but they are eager to learn, especially if they are doing an MS, MPH, PhD beyond their medical degrees. And what I was saying in our group was that you've got to have different parts of your brain working at the same time when you're in the space usually with in individual interviews. But that what I didn't want to really call out, but Dr. Vermund has done it for me, is that physicians in particular, when they're learning about conducting a clinical interview, and Deb, maybe you can speak to this, my understanding of their training, I'm not a physician, has been that they really have to go through, when they're doing their interview, when they're doing their history on their patient, they have a set way of going through the review of systems, and what they present to their attending has to be in a set order. And it's very difficult for them to, I think it's difficult for them to kind of break out of that into more concentrating on where your person is taking you and being okay with that. That, you know, there's a lot to be said, particularly with qualitative interviews, usually for most of our research projects, of what do they talk about first? I mean, I think that's also probably important for, you know, the physicians, but it's even more important. And when I'm asking a question, I try to start out as global as possible to see where they're going to go.
Yeah.
And if they're, you know, struggling with it, then I'll get more focused and leading if I have to. But you know, I'd be interested in hearing what Deb has to say.
I accept the call out. No, that's your reflections, and I feel funny saying Stan, but Stan's reflections were, I was about to say great comment, and then I saw he dropped off before. As a clinician, I think I was taught in a very Socratic method, and it also depends on the school and where you were taught. I had a very Socratic teaching. So while there are open-ended questions, it's a directionality in the interview and a very structured, like you can't miss pieces. And there is a certain structure and mandatory components that is really hammered in. So that resonates. And then I think the other reflection I had from both of your comments was that I have tried to learn qualitative methods, and then I switch domains and say preventive cardiology versus informatics. Those domains even approach qualitative methods differently, even though there are best practices within each. So I think that's the other challenge, is it's more domain specific than I had anticipated, and I'm now relearning, you know, best practices. So this is perfect timing for me. So thank you. I don't know if those comments forwarded your thoughts, Lauretta.
No, they did. Thank you very much. You know, and I think that maybe what needs to be taken away is you need to have a certain amount of flexibility. You know, I said in our breakout room that, you know, I've consulted on many projects, and it just seems like in every one of the project, there was a new wrinkle that, you know, I had to deal with in some way, and you know, learn more about how to approach the research question or whatever, but that you've got to be flexible, that you don't have one way of doing qualitative research.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone, for sticking with us till the end. I really appreciate it. This has been really helpful for me. I will send Lauretta an updated PowerPoint with some of the additional papers in there, Lauretta, so everyone has the references that I shared today.
Excellent. And thank you so much for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Somehow I'm not seeing how to stop the recording. There we go.